The bill was long, it was poorly written, and in the end, they took out all of the mentions of Sharia, which really begs the question, why include Sharia at all in the first draft of it? Okay. So to sum up where we are so far, chocolate ice cream, especially in a sundae form, is bad for you. Okay. Arguably, all these bills and amendments, whether they single out Sharia or refer to religious law more generally, violate the First Amendment. In addition, depending on their wording, they potentially violate a bunch of other clauses in the U.S. Constitution, including the Supremacy Clause, the Contracts Clause, and the Full Faith and Credit Clause. Recognizing this, proponents of anti-Sharia legislation have basically made a switch, going with what we've dubbed the plain vanilla form of such legislation. That is, bills or legislations that are designed to withstand attack on First Amendment grounds by being neutral towards religion on their face. They do not use the word Sharia or even religious law anywhere in their text. However, this does not stop politicians or other proponents from more or less explicitly saying that they target Sharia. Many, if not all of these facially neutral bills are based on model legislation called American Law for American Courts. And some version of this has actually passed in 4 states so far: Tennessee, Louisiana, Arizona, and Kansas, and it's been attempted in somewhere around 24 more. This, although most of the state politicians introducing these bills can't point to any actual cases in their state where Sharia has posed a real problem, as we've discussed. Wyoming, let's take Wyoming for an example. State Representative Gerald Gay proposed it because he said it would be a preemptive strike against Sharia, even though it's never been an issue there, and it's estimated that there are only 263 Muslims in the entire state, which is 0.05% of 1% of the population. This model was drafted by David Yerushalmi, who we've heard of before, and it's promoted by the so-called nonpartisan group, American Public Policy Alliance. Now, while the actual text of the law is neutral, on the Alliance's website, in its introduction to it, it says that it was, quote, crafted to protect American citizens' constitutional rights against the infiltration and incursion of foreign laws and foreign legal doctrines, especially Islamic Sharia law, unquote. So how do you propose to do this if you don't mention Sharia in the text? Okay. Well, this text, which is generally included verbatim in the laws that modeled after it, states that it's against public policy to apply any foreign law when doing so would violate a person's constitutional rights. Interestingly, this is already against the law. Forget about public policy. Now, there are a few really other interesting things about this model legislation. While most of the bills based on it would only prohibit application of a foreign law that actually violates a person's constitutional rights, the model's language goes even further and seems to suggest that if any part of a law, legal code, or system would not grant a party the same constitutional rights as in the U.S., then it cannot be used here. Kansas's version has this exact language, but it's not exactly clear what this means or how it would be applied. The other thing that's interesting is how the language of the legislation has evolved. And it's evolved over the time. If you've looked on the website, you can see it's changed over the past year or two. It was originally written just to pass muster on First Amendment grounds, but additional carve-outs keep getting added to it. Okay. These were added because of objections that were raised about such legislation by many in the business and legal communities. For example, they pointed out that these laws were bad for business because they limited companies' freedom of contract and choice of law options. Wait, no problem. This act shall not apply to a corporation, so we're covered. It runs afoul of U.S. treaty obligations. Okay, so now we exclude treaties. We've got a specific carve-out for what we call ecclesiastical disputes, such as a dispute between a minister and his church. And some versions even have a specific carve-out for Native American law. So it becomes more and more obvious that this legislation is really designed to target Sharia specifically as applied to individuals, although it will also negatively impact Jews and other groups. It really poses a problem in First Amendment freedom of religion cases, where judges often have to consider religious and religious requirements or law, and in family law cases, including those with some nexus to a foreign jurisdiction, and including those that are not Muslim jurisdictions. So if you have foreign law coming in, is a divorce in Japan valid, these kind of laws can pose a real problem. This shows you how broad the movement has become. A similarly facially neutral stance is now in the Republican Party platform. Okay? There it is. Okay, so this is about as mainstream as it can become at this point. Now, proponents of this legislation have made a big deal that no Muslim or other civil rights groups have challenged the facially neutral versions of these laws so far, like they did with the Sharia-specific laws as the Oklahoma Amendment. Now, this may be true, but why? Well, the legislation is basically legally pointless. There's nothing left to challenge. With all the exceptions and carve-outs, you remove religion, corporations, treaties, etc. It's the legal equivalent of diet ice cream. Okay? You remove the cream, you remove the sugar, so it's no longer full of fat and calories. It may no longer be bad for you, but what's the point? Who wants to eat this stuff anyway? It probably tastes really gross. So if the legislation is legally unnecessary, what is the point of it? In my view, it's doing something really insidious. And just what it was dawned on me about a year and a half ago when I was at a conference on Sharia law in America at NYU Law School. Like this, it was open to the public, and there were two very nice women who seemed to be retirees who had come all the way down from Long Island to attend. And one of them had the courage to stand up after one presentation by a Muslim presenter in a room filled with a whole lot of Muslims and admit that Sharia scares me to death. I admired her courage and her candor, and I started talking to her in the ladies' room during a break. And I found she truly was interested in understanding more about Muslims and Sharia, but really had a lot of preconceived notions that were hard to dispel. What really fascinated me was that she kept coming back to the same question over and over. But how much Sharia does a Muslim have to observe? I don't know. How much Jewish law does a Jew have to observe? What about a Catholic? Am I still a Catholic even if I use birth control and get a divorce? Who decides? And more importantly, why does it matter? Here, I believe it matters because this legislation does not attack Muslims directly, simply because they are Muslims. You know, that's really uncool because we have these, moderate Muslims out there, whatever that means. Rather, it seizes upon this thing labeled Sharia. And that Sharia is equated with something bad, sneaky, dangerous, and downright un-American. This works because the general public and politicians have a distorted view of Sharia, and especially how it actually appears in the United States. Professor McFarland really gave us a good description of how it appears and how Muslims use it and want to use it, and it looks nothing like the image that most people have and most politicians have in their mind. But what ends up happening is by marking Sharia as bad, dangerous, and anti-American. By extension, you're marking Muslims who observe Sharia, who pray or eat halal or wear a head covering, as bad, dangerous, and anti-American. So if you follow this, it implies that the less observant a Muslim is, the less dangerous he or she must be. So that in the end, only a totally non-observant Muslim is really a good or safe Muslim. This is what I have dubbed the only good Muslim is a bad Muslim paradox. So anti-Sharia legislation, regardless of its flavor, really serves no purpose beyond this, beyond vilifying Muslims. As laws, they are legally pointless and unnecessary. Unfortunately, as propaganda against Muslims, they continue to make headway.